Warning, the following presentation is intended for mature audiences and it contains graphic descriptions of crime scenes, adult dialogue, and strong language. This podcast represents the opinions of the hosts and their guests, and every effort is made to ensure that the information is accurate. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome, fellow armchair detectives. I'm your host, Ashleigh.
And I'm your host, Tamlyn Rossouw.
And this is Just in Crime. Join us as we explore the issue of gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa
by exploring the victims and their stories.
So, hi everyone and welcome to today's episode of Just in Crime. This episode is going to be a little bit different as I'm going to be speaking about just like some smaller cases that are basically going to highlight a very, very serious issue that is currently happening in South Africa. So unfortunately, it won't be, or rather fortunately, it won't be a murder, but it is a very big issue plaguing South Africa. And you'll find out what that is as we go through the story. So just bear with me for this first half. Also note that I'm not going to mention the names of any of the people who are in the stories, just obviously because I want to protect their identities, and it is a really, really sensitive topic. So we're going to start off by just painting a really nice picture for you. So we're going to call this first woman Mary. So Mary is a single mother to 6 children, one of which passed away, and therefore she's currently looking after 5 children in a township in South Africa. She has like her firstborn who is still really, really young, but he has basically become the man of the house. And he has a twin sister. When I say really young, I mean like maybe like 15-ish. She then had like another set of twin girls and another little boy. They all live in a really, really, really tiny flat with her mom, so the children's grandmother. And when I say small, I mean like maybe only 2 rooms. And 6 kids in 2 rooms, not a fun time. So Mary herself admits that like she loves her children, but having this many is so hard and it poses like hundreds and hundreds of challenges, but she's kind of gotten used to it by now. She mentions that she's also like really proud of them and they're good kids and they haven't used the fact that they don't house to basically let them like derail their lives, which is very uncommon actually. A lot of the time when you don't have both parental figures in the household, there tends to be some sort of conflict that arises. So one thing that Mary is really, really strict on is school and education. This is because she fell pregnant at a really young age, so she couldn't complete her schooling. This has obviously costed her tons of opportunities and experiences. And as most young moms would like understand is when you have a kid young, you do lose out on that time to be a kid yourself. You don't get to go to the parties. You don't get to go to the sleepovers. You spend about 90% of your time looking after the child. And if it's not looking after the child, it's finding money to look after the child. So basically, and this really broke my heart when she said this, she said that she like doesn't want them to be like her and she really wants them to be successful. She plans that once she's gotten all her children through school, she'll then give that like opportunity to herself as she realizes like how difficult not having an education is. For her, being her mother hasn't exactly been like the easiest experience all around. And like she tries really hard to basically stop this from getting in the way of her parenting. And surprisingly, like her kids actually respect her really, really like a lot. And hold on. Her kids respect her like a lot. and basically they have a super healthy relationship. So I feel like this is a bit weird to mention, but she has like really good boundaries with them, and she's very open and honest, especially with conversations surrounding sex and like safety around that, which is really odd in South Africa because we are a very conservative nation. And so the topic of sex is obviously very taboo to be spoken about, especially within like the family household. And I mean, personally, like I don't even think my parents gave me the sex talk. Like the school definitely beat them to it.
Yeah, dude, like in South Africa with like ALO, which is life orientation, we don't really have proper sex education, as like you said, it's like super taboo. And ALO, like, I don't know, it just kind of used scare tactics, if anything.
Yeah, like I mean, it's basically that typical Mean Girls quote of, don't have sex because you will fall pregnant and die.
Or rather, in the South African context and in the ALO room, don't have sex because you will get AIDS, fall pregnant, and then die. And I don't mean this to be rude, but this is literally what we get taught in our ALO classrooms.
And I mean, like, dude, those are valid points that we should be learning, like AIDS, pregnancy, safety. I get it, but why is that all that we're learning? Like, ALO is such a good subject. Like, it has the potential to be a good subject, and just like somehow it's not. So basically, as I mentioned before, she had a son, and he's basically currently acting as the man of the house. And for someone who's, like I said, around about age 15, this is really, really challenging for him. Even at his young age, he tried to help his mom provide for the whole family. He doesn't really have anyone to speak to about his problems because it's literally just him and his like little sisters. And I know like from research and stuff that basically the most influential person in like a child's life is the same-sex role model. So if you are a like female, you are going to end up looking up to your mom a lot more than if you are a boy, you're going to end up looking up to your dad to kind of role model what you should be doing in society. And he really doesn't have that. However, this hasn't stopped him from just becoming like a really amazing kid. He is really protective over his mother and his family, and has made it clear to everyone in the community that no one is to lay a single hand on them. When I was listening to him, my whole feeling about him is he's just someone who has such compassion and understanding towards the struggles his mom goes through as a single mom. And he seems to hold absolutely no remorse or anger about the fact that he's had to grow up a little bit soon. He's actually like very mature and insightful for his age. So, back to their life, Mary really, at the moment, is not comfortable with where her kids are growing up. There's a lot of drugs, alcohol, prostitution, just things you don't really want your kids to be around. And like for her, it doesn't really affect her because she's older and you can easily ignore it, especially when you know what's going on and you've made a choice to kind of take yourself out of that kind of lifestyle. Her kids, however, do view this, and unfortunately it does become a form of role modeling, so that's a massive concern for her. However, she's basically managed to essentially combat this by like creating a sense of friendship. So when her kids come back to school, basically she makes sure that she like plays with them. They must come to her immediately. They do activities, and she basically does all sorts of things to keep them out of like getting in trouble and off the streets where mischief may occur. So something that Mary is also a really big part of, and I guess this speaks to the conservative nature of South Africa as a whole, is basically it's like a little group in the community where they encourage young girls to basically stay true and hold to who they are and like save their bodies for marriage, to put it simply. I'm not going to go too much into this because it's a very traditional thing and I don't have very much insight into that. But if anyone's listening who does, and wants to basically, I guess, educate me, feel free to contact us on social media. I know that this process, however, was originally started within like the Zulu tribe and has now progressed to other groups in South Africa. From what I've seen from like a video clip and stuff, it looks like a very joyous and happy occasion. Everyone, like all the women wear beads and they march down the streets and they're singing. The older women will then follow like behind the younger girls with sticks to protect the young girls from the boys like touching them. It's basically to say like no one is allowed to touch them. They need to be respected and no one has a right to do anything to them, which I literally absolutely love. For Mary, the main reason why she got involved is because she wants her kids to be safe and basically take their time enjoying being like a young woman. She doesn't want them to be used by boys or taken advantage of, and she doesn't want them to spend their lives running away from like HIV, AIDS, early pregnancy, and wants like them to save themselves for marriage, because then if they choose to have a baby, it's exactly that. They have a choice. It's something they want to do, not something they have to do. And overall, her kids genuinely do have fun being there, and they have lots of friends in the group, so they wouldn't even want to leave. It's not like they're being forced. So you're probably like, Ash, why did you give me this random synopsis of this random lady's life? And I'm getting to that. This is a really, really important part of the story. So when Mary was a young girl, maybe 19, she, as most people, would explore her sexuality, and she had realized that she likes women, and she was very open, being like, hey, I'm a lesbian and I'm open about it. I think she knew that it was frowned upon in the community, but she also understood that you can't live your life being who you're not. Eventually, though, word got out to her community, and the men in her community really didn't approve of her sexuality and basically decided to change her back being to homosexual. And heterosexual. And only by then had they decided that the way they were going to do this was to rape her in a process that's basically called corrective rape. This didn't just happen once, and it became like a habit for the men in the community. And as she described it, she was basically her body was basically a playground for them. None of the men were ever arrested, and she was too frightened to talk about it. And at the time, she was also unaware that she had fallen pregnant. Unfortunately, because this kept going on, every single one of her children that she has today is a product of corrective rape.
So when she said that they made a playground of her body, she was being dead serious. She wasn't using it as I don't know what, but that's disgusting.
6 kids, dude. 6 to corrective rape. And obviously, not only did that stop many opportunities happening for her, it also really did affect her other relationships, except for the ones with her children. She strangely finds she loves them just as much as she would have if they had been conceived otherwise. And they've basically become the reason that she wakes up in the morning, and she says she literally cannot think of her life without them. She has said there have been times where she's thought of killing herself, and I guess suicidal ideation was very clearly present, but eventually concluded that she wouldn't do this, because what if the same thing happened to them and she wasn't around to protect them? I think that would break any mother's heart. So this experience, as I mentioned, has caused many issues, and one of them being in her love life. And when I was listening to her speak, this section particularly made me really, really sad, because she said she has been in love with another woman before. And I just want to emphasize woman. So if any of you were confused or under the idea that corrective rape somehow works, it doesn't. She still likes women. However, that relationship really didn't work out because she wasn't over what she had gone through, and understandably so. And one of the main reasons being is she doesn't like being touched. And I don't think I would either. So she basically said, and this is where my heart broke, she basically said that she really prays that someday God will give her someone that would make her really, really happy. And as she says this, you can literally just see tears welling up in her eyes. So Mary's life would have been completely different, and she could have had so many different opportunities if it wasn't for this process called corrective rape. She would have possibly finished school, maybe found love, and most importantly, she wouldn't have been subjected to such severe trauma. So let's just unpack this a bit. What exactly is corrective rape? So corrective rape is the attempt to cure a lesbian of their homosexuality. So on average, in South Africa, 10 women are raped basically per week in order to correct their sexuality. In the case of Mary, she was very, very lucky that they let her live afterwards. There was a case in 2007 where two women who were both like women and gay rights activists were outside a bar when like a group of men started like heckling and calling them tomboys. The women were then after that gang raped, tortured, tied with their underwear and shot in the head execution style. And that was a really popular case, like because the woman was so well known in the activist community, and yet no one was ever convicted for that case.
So, like, why didn't we hear about this, like, on the news? Like, I don't know, it might have been on the news, but why wasn't there, like, a bigger deal made out of it? Like, this is crazy.
Oh, dude, I agree with you. And I may be, like, completely out of line in saying this, but I feel like it circles back to the system as a whole. Like, specifically, we see it all over the world, but it also happens in South Africa, where minority groups are not taken seriously and their issues aren't seen as real. And I think it's also because our system is rooted in such patriarchy, and it prevents us from like solving and confronting these very real and very severe issues because like it's not happening to us.
Like, dude, at the end of the day, it's very easy to look away and not view these situations as important when it's not happening to you.
Exactly. So basically, just a couple more situations that happened, just so we can really understand the severity and the extent of the brutality that happens in a lot of these attacks. So another woman, she was at a gay club, which is it generally acts as a safe space for people who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, as we saw like with Pulse nightclub overseas. Same kind of vibe here in South Africa. She was basically approached by a straight man in the club, and as she turned around, he stabbed her in the back. This was a complete stranger, keep in mind. I thought that the situation would have just ended there, but the trauma in her life then continues, and the men in her community raped both her 12 and 13-year-old girls to show the children that they don't need to be like their mother and they need to be with a man. Another story was a young girl got attacked in the streets by a group of men. They basically grabbed her, stole her phone and called her girlfriend at the time, and basically said like, "We have your bitch." Obviously, the girlfriend knew what was going on, and she started pleading with them on the other side, and she was like, "No, she is not my girlfriend. We're just friends. Like, we're just really close. Like, I promise, we're not dating." Obviously to try and save her girlfriend's life, but they didn't believe her. This next part is extremely, I guess, triggering or rather graphic, so just keep that in mind. If you're sensitive, maybe just skip over. So basically what they did was they found like an old homeless man on the side of the road, and they forced her to perform oral on him. They obviously then gang raped her. They poured beer all over her. They cut her body with the bottles. And just when she thought like the attack was fine, they went to her grandmother's house, who was 89 at the time, and they basically broke in and ransacked everything. They pointed really massive guns at her, and thank God no one got hurt, but it's still such a horrific and traumatic situation to be in. Apparently, when she went to go see her grandmother just looked at her and was like, "What happened?" And in that moment, she just broke down in tears because she couldn't like believe that the situation could have gone so bad. So, as usual with many cases in South Africa, while plenty of women have gone to the police to report these cases, and like regardless of the amount of evidence presented, the cases never seem to follow through, and these women basically have to continue living their lives in the same communities as their rapists and basically watch them walk up and down the street a free man. So for many people in South Africa, also homosexuality, while it is completely legal here, just want to make that clear, like our constitution says that we literally can't discriminate against anyone, including based on like the premise of sexual orientation. The society, however, is still very different to that law in that we're very patriarchal, and this is not surprising. For many men, specifically in South Africa, they believe that women become like lesbian because of the failures that they've had in previous relationships with men. There are also men who have openly stated in interviews that they appreciate when other men go out and rape women who are lesbian just so that they can know, like let them know that they need to be straight, which is absolutely ridiculous to me. It's sometimes even prevalent within the family dynamic too, and this is where it like kind of breaks my heart because you see that it's not always from the outside in. Sometimes that's switched around. Many men in South Africa have straight up said that they would kick their daughter out if they found out she was lesbian. They were even like, no, she must go where lesbians go. I'm sure there's a place that they go because they're not normal. They're not like us, which is, again, absolutely ridiculous. And I'm going to talk about another case now, just so that we can see how far it really went. And again, this case really broke my heart. So just to give you a bit of a background, a woman named Claire Carter left her home in New York in 2011 to basically photograph South African corrective rape victims. So she would go and she'd spend about 2 years basically building the trust of these women, hearing their stories and eventually publishing it. And this would then go out to other international countries and people like the UN who could help in this. And basically, she came across a girl named Pearl Marley. Pearl Marley was one of the youngest victims that she spoke to, and literally her story broke everyone's heart when they heard it. So she was introduced to her through another organization who basically, they're called Free Gender. It's an LGBT rights organization that specializes in helping victims of corrective rape. So Free Gender, they literally have no phone, no computer, no money, no counselors, absolutely nothing. Pearl, who is the survivor in the story, is now 21 and she currently volunteers there. But her whole situation happened right under her roof when she was only 12 years old. So basically, her mother suspected that Pearl might have been a lesbian as she was a tomboy. And I mean, there's obviously no correlation to that. How one person dresses and acts literally has nothing to do with their sexual orientation. And so basically what her mother had decided to do was she returned home from church one day with an old man. Pearl doesn't know what conversation had taken place and only that there was money involved. Her mother told Pearl to go to the room. She said that if I don't do what is right, I won't get my lunch tomorrow. The man entered her room. Pearl then recalls the following. He locked my door and I was in my pajamas, about to get in the bed. He told me how beautiful I was, how fast I'm growing. He said that he was going to sleep there with her and started slapping Pearl, who started screaming, bringing her mother to the door. She said, "Pearl, you're making so much noise. Shut up." He told me to take off my clothes, and I refused. He beat me. I was fighting him, and he overpowered and raped me. The next morning, Pearl's mother acted normally and soon after asked him to move in. For the next 4 years, he regularly raped Pearl as a de facto husband to make her straight. She tried to go to the police, but they started laughing when she said the most recent rape was last week. This is because they expect women to basically come to the police station immediately, which is probably not going to be the case because you're probably scared and there's a lot of thoughts going on. And it's really, really scary to say things out loud because you don't know what's going to happen. Unfortunately, by the time Pearl was 16, she had become pregnant with his child, prompting her to go to the police again, who this time imposed a restraining order against the man. But days after giving birth, her abuser came to the home while she was alone with the baby. He wanted to touch me again, she said. So I was fighting him. He kicked me in the side of my waist and all my stitches got loose. Though she successfully fought him off, Pearl's troubles soon spiraled. My mother and this guy took the baby away. He was 7 months old because I was a lesbian. Her mother basically believed that if Pearl touched or fed the boy, it would make him gay. Pearl moved out and went to the court to gain access again. But 3 years later, she's still trying to win custody and is currently only allowed to visit her son on weekends. I used to sleep under the bridge, not eat, just cry. I hanged myself. It was on a Monday. I took pills, took alcohol, drank cleaning appliances, and then hanged myself. But God said, it's not your time. So this story, as I mentioned, was really, really difficult to read. And again, because she was so young and with such, I guess, in my opinion, backwards mindsets, that it just honestly broke my heart. And I went to go look at the photograph of the set of corrective rape victims, and I read their stories. And again, my heart was broken with each and every story I read. If you're interested in looking at these photos or hearing these stories, we're going to link them on our social media pages. So feel free to go and look at those and make sure you comment and like and really get involved in the conversation. So the issue of correctional rape is not one that's currently being addressed as a problem in our country, and the issue is only getting worse. These women who do seek justice from the criminal justice system are currently being let down. Only 1 in 5 reported rapes end up in court, with only 4% of these cases actually resulting in a conviction. And as I mentioned in previous cases, the conviction rate in South Africa is extremely, extremely low. Unfortunately, with this, there have also been 31 recorded murders of lesbian women since 1998. And to date, there's only been 1 conviction for these crimes. There are women's rights groups such as Power and TAC that report these cases, but they say that it's usual to have a delay in the hearings and such by the judge. Many of these cases failing because of substandard investigation and insufficient preparation. Another issue is that we currently don't have a database in South Africa that takes into consideration the hate crimes that are aggravated specifically by one's sexual orientation. And I mean, this should exist so that we can know if there's in a sense, a pandemic going on. We need to take into consideration, like I said, that one's sexual orientation can be an aggravating factor in many of these cases. So I know I've just gone on this whole ramble about corrective rape and the issues, and I've told you all the stories. But I mean, we can sit and we can talk about everything wrong, but it really doesn't help if we don't talk about the solutions. So basically, just to round things off, firstly, from a community standpoint, because I think, honestly, it's one of those things. Charity begins at home. We need to look at ourselves first. And we need to recognize that violence against women is a really widespread human rights violation. And it's actually a key security issue. And we basically also need to take steps to prioritize the safety of these women and address that violence is currently being aggravated by people's sexual orientation. And we need to give these women a safe space where they can speak and talk about things and know that they can go to the police. So we do this by, if someone is telling us stories or telling us of their experience, we don't trivialize it. We don't ask degrading questions well, what were you wearing? All the other stuff we spoke about in the gender-based violence conversation from series 1. So basically, that's what we can do as a community. But I think a lot of it comes from the government. And first and foremost, this shouldn't even be a discussion, because the first thing they need to do is uphold the South African Constitution, which basically prohibits discrimination against anyone on the basis of sexual orientation, including by tackling the rising tide of violence against lesbian women. Okay, so that basically means we need to say, listen, it's the law. You actually can't do this. Your hate crime, it's one of those things. We don't care if it's your opinion. Your opinion is currently illegal. So we also need to demonstrate action in this area by signing the UN's Declaration on Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity, condemning violence, harassment, discrimination, exclusion, stigmatization, and prejudice based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And for me, what's totally wild is, why has this not been signed when it is literally almost identical to our own South African Constitution? Thirdly, we need to bring all perpetrators of violence acts against women to justice, which we also mentioned in that gender-based violence conversation. We need to make tackling sexual violence a national priority for the justice system and allocate adequate resources for investigation, as well as appropriate training and incentives for the police and judiciary.
Yeah, dude, without the proper training on how to handle a survivor who has gone through this traumatic event so that they feel safe and heard is so super important. And without that training, it acts as like an unconscious deterrent from women coming forward and reporting these cases.
Exactly. Like if you know your case isn't going to be said, then like, or prosecuted or heard, taken seriously, like you kind of feel like, for lack of a better words, a little bit of a dwus coming forward. You're like, why did I even say anything? So we also need to recognize specifically amongst this conversation of violence against women is we need to recognize the hate crimes against lesbian and transgender women as a specific crime category supported by the necessary resources to investigate and bring these crimes to court. So this will also, like, it basically includes people being attacked on the grounds of their sexual orientation. And we need to make sure that this is stated in basically the prohibition of hate speech bill, which we currently have, but I feel like that needs to be included because, as I've said in previous episodes, the first way to identify, well, to fix a problem is you need to identify it. And by putting it down in writing in our law, I think it will have a massive benefit to the country. And also from there, once it's in like writing, we're able to build those systems that I spoke of that will like categorize these violent acts against lesbian and transgender women as a specific category. We can then keep up to date of how this is being handled. And then also we need to like allocate resources for adequate services for the survivors of sexual violence, including like post-exposure prophylaxis to prevent HIV transmission and emergency contraception. So basically what that means is if you are raped, you can basically, when you go to the hospital, it's basically like a process you go through. If it's within a certain amount of hours, it can essentially like prevent you from getting HIV. And then obviously emergency contraception would come into play in terms of protecting women from falling pregnant due to acts of violence against women. So basically what that says is we can put all these resources into like catching these people, but what's most important in all these cases is making sure that our survivors are okay. And I mean, when I was specifically looking, I couldn't find many organizations or NGOs, and again, this could be because I wasn't looking hard enough, but I don't think survivors have time to be scrolling through the internet to get help. It should be readily available. And so with this, I know it's a big ask, but if anyone out there feels like starting an NGO to help like these women in these situations, I think that it would be so greatly appreciated and would be helping so much towards just the cause, because it is such a like really big necessity that we need. And also, we need to ensure that like HIV services are available and accessible for like people who fall part of the LGBTQ plus community, including lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, whatever category you fall into. And we need to like take action to tackle gender discrimination and violence against women, including by allowing like economic empowerment measures and community education programs. So what that means is basically looking for programs and basically creating programs for people within like the LGBTQ plus community, for them to get jobs, for them to grow their lives so that they're able to not be, I guess, pushed down by the stigmatization that they often are faced. And then also community education programs. As I mentioned before, some people in South Africa, and I would say actually a very large part, and I mean, they obviously, people grew up in a different time in different cultures, and so there's different understandings, but we need to understand that in the country we live in, we accept and love everyone. And we need to educate people that things like sexual orientation they're not a choice. It is something you are literally born with. And I mean, you love who you love. You can't choose that. So all in all, there needs to basically be like a top to bottom, bottom to top strategy that the government needs to put in place to overcome this issue, because as we've mentioned in other cases, sex work, femicide, these issues are only getting worse the more we ignore them.
So basically, with all of this being said, and as we close off this episode, while we know there aren't many resources to help causes, we still highly recommend contacting the Gender-Based Violence Command Center. And also, always keep in mind, we are not professionals in any of the discussed fields. If you or are a victim of these crimes or know anyone that's a victim of these crimes or in danger, you can find resources on our social media pages, or alternatively, as we mentioned before, you can go contact the Gender-Based Violence Command Center at 0800 428 428 or SMS HELP to 31531.
Okay, so that basically concludes today's episode. We'd obviously love to hear your opinions and we'd love you to join in on this conversation. So be sure to check out all of our episodes. Also, if you enjoy episodes of this nature where we're having more conversations with cases sprinkled along, let us know. We're obviously here to provide for you guys. And yeah, that's it for today's episode.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Be sure to check out our social media for more episodes, case-related content, and other riveting info.
We'd also like to give a massive shout out to Christian Putter for creating our theme song. Be sure to check out more of his work on Instagram at Christian_Putter.
And then we would also just like to thank Anthony Catano for creating our album art, so be sure to follow him at @Catano on Instagram.
And lastly, we'd like to give a huge shout out to VU Media for helping produce this podcast. Be sure to follow them on Facebook and Insta at VU_Media SA.